And this is the second part of a two-part video. One thing that might not be obvious to the modern student is that in the ancient world, monarchy is not necessarily inherited. Most monarchies in the ancient world are, at least in origin, elected. And this is the case in Rome. What happens when Romulus dies is the aristocracy collectively chooses the worthiest and most capable and most respected man to be the next king. This is the process by which all of the successive kings, down to the sixth king, Servius Tullius, are selected. They are elected by the Roman nobility, except the imperium and the essentially lifelong magistracy of Rex, of being king. They serve in that role as the chief executive of Rome until they die, and then the process happens again. This kind of elective monarchy is common in the ancient world, rare today, because at some point in the history of a long monarchy, people start to say, well, hey, the most ideal person to succeed this great king that we just had is somebody with the same blood, somebody who inherited the traits that we admired in this previous great king. And the idea of inherited monarchy, dynastic monarchy, comes into being at some point in all different kinds of monarchies. And so today, most monarchies, the British monarchy and so forth, are automatically inherited because they are dynastic monarchies. The exception is the papacy. So that's where we are in our story right now. The successor to Romulus was elected, as were the kings of Rome in general. As we progress through the kings, the possibility of them being historical figures increases. And so the second king might or might not have been a real person. His name is Numa. And whereas Romulus is associated with these Roman values of mercilessness, ruthlessness, the creation of Rome, Numa is associated with the key structures and functioning of the Roman state religion. Because Numa is the second king, having the Roman religion invested in him means that it's secondary in importance to the Romans only to the creation of the city itself. I need to talk about how the Romans think about the gods. People coming to Roman history for the first time tend to assume that Roman ideas of the gods are exactly the same as the Greeks. And the reason for this is that much, much later, during the time that Rome had an empire in which it was necessary to be a part of the Greek world, the Romans equated their gods with the Greek gods in order for the boundaries between the two cultures to be less extreme, at least in this respect. And so Zeus is identified with Jupiter, Athena is identified with Minerva, Hera is identified with Juno, and so forth. It becomes all very systematic, and this is elaborated upon, and the mythology is expanded. That all comes much later and is done in retrospect. The Romans themselves don't think about the gods in a way like the Greeks at all. The basic Roman conception of the gods is of spirits that inhabit places of boundary, places of juncture, places of impact on human lives. These spirits are called numen. And they tend not to have faces, especially in early times. They tend not to be thought of in an anthropomorphic way with statues and stories about their personalities. These are forces of nature that are invested in the juncture points and the critical components of the world around every Roman family and every Roman home. So, for example, the boundary between your property and the property of someone else is inhabited by a spirit called TERMINUS. That makes this boundary a sacred thing. In a time before written contracts, ensuring that a boundary is held firm is of critical importance. And so This is watched over by, inhabited by, a spirit whose role in the physical world is to watch over boundaries, literal boundaries between property and figurative boundaries as well. In a similar way, we have a god who inhabits doorways and who represents the transition from one thing to another. This god is called JANUS. Later on, when he was given a face, he was actually given two faces, because Janus, the god of doorways, faces in both directions. This is governing the transition from where you are most secure and the world beyond your home, where things are less sure. This is also, Janus is identified with the boundary between the past and the future, which has very similar aspect of transitioning from the sure to the uncertain. The hearth, the cooking fire in every Roman home, is inhabited by Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, who governs the survival of members of the family through the production of meals. And so forth and so on. The Roman attitude toward the gods is that they are spiritual forces that are invested in the critical aspects of the world around us. There are also gods that are associated with Rome as a society, Rome as a body of citizens that sort of inhabits the citizen body of Rome. And these are the gods that the Roman government consults in advance of doing any particular act. The Romans believe absolutely that the gods must be consulted and their approval ascertained before they can undertake any action, whether it's convening an assembly, going to war, raising taxes, or building an aqueduct. You have to consult the gods first. And the Romans have three gods of the Roman state to which these rituals are directed, who are given temples in the heart of the city, and who are the first to have statues that are situated in the hearts of these temples, so that when the state is appealing to the gods, they can visualize someone that they are interacting with. The chief of these is the patron deity of the Roman city-state. City-states throughout the ancient world share pantheons of gods with their neighbors, but each city-state has a god from that pantheon that it invites to live amongst them, to have a temple, a home at the heart of their community. For the Romans, this patron deity is the powerful sky god Jupiter. At the top of the Capitoline Hill, there is a temple to Jupiter Optimus Maximus, Jupiter best and greatest. This is where all the most important rituals are conducted, where key documents and assets are stored, parts of the Roman treasury, and so forth. It's the most important religious location in the city of Rome. The second god of the Roman state is, not surprisingly, the god of war. This is Mars. The Romans mainly deal with Mars outside of Rome, for the reasons that I've talked about. Once you pass the Pomerium, then your leader becomes a general, and your assembly of Romans is sworn in as an army, and you take up your arms, and you go deal with all the other people outside of Rome. And Mars deals with that. So you can think of Jupiter as dealing with the city of Rome and being the god of Rome within the Pomerium, the god that is most important to things that happen in the city of Rome. And Mars deals with Romans as they're doing things outside of that in a military aspect. The third god of the Roman state is Quirinus. Quirinus as a god is invested in the idea of Roman citizenship itself, and so Quirinus is invoked in terms of the responsibilities of the citizen toward the community and the strength and durability of the Roman community itself. So the Roman state religion involves consulting the gods in advance of every action. The primary means of doing this, as I mentioned in the previous video, is augury. One of the things that I should mention about the Roman king is, if you've taken other courses of mine, you'll know that I talk about the priest king as being central to the idea of a city-state. A priest king is a king whose job it is to act as an intermediary between gods, which are sometimes hostile and sometimes benevolent, and the people of his community. The priest king has the job of protecting the people from the gods by ensuring that the gods are happy, by doing what is necessary to protect the community not only from hostile humans but from the forces of the divine world as well. So what this means is the king of Rome is Rome's highest priest and performs the most important rituals, speaking to the gods as the sovereign representative of the people of the Roman community. This is very much enshrined in the Roman religious structure that is attributed to the second king Numa. A number of priesthoods are associated with Numa. The FLAMENes are special priests that are dedicated to particular gods, and so the most important of these is the FLAMEN associated with Jupiter, which is called the FLAMEN DIALIS. But there are a dozen or so FLAMENes that are special priests associated with individual important gods. The augurs we've talked about. The Vestals, also associated with Numa. So I talked about the eternal, incorruptible nature of virginal chastity being one of the things that Romans obsess about in terms of gender. Virginal chastity is a counterweight to the corrupt and bloodied hands of the Roman males. The Romans have a flame that represents the undying nature of the city of Rome, and this flame is sacred to Vesta, the goddess of the hearths. In a sense, this is the hearth of, symbolically, the entire Roman community. This is an eternal flame, which means that as long as it burns, the Romans believe that Rome will endure indefinitely into the future. The job of protecting that flame cannot be entrusted to the bloodied hands of men. The sacred flame is protected by virginal maidens. And these are the Vestal virgins, the virgins who dedicate themselves to the goddess Vesta and to the maintenance of the eternal flame. The purity of the virgin is the most potent, most enduring, most incorrupt of all natural forces in the world. And the Vestal virgins continue to be immensely sacred throughout Roman history, even when the Romans are masters of the world. One of the most horrifying things you can imagine is the purity of a Vestal virgin being sullied by a male. The penalty for this religious crime is being buried alive. Both the Vestal and the perpetrator are killed in a way that allows the earth to swallow them up as if they had never been. The fetiales, we'll come back to this in the reading, the Roman way of declaring war. But the fetiales are representative of the fact that the Romans do everything in terms of ensuring that their gods are satisfied. And this includes going to war. Whenever they wage war on an enemy, they first undertake religious rituals with a special kind of priest called a fetial. And the fetial's job is to go to the boundary of this potential enemy and declare the Roman grievance and ask for retribution. And if this does not take place, the fetial then undertakes a ritual which declares that the Roman gods are satisfied that these people are an enemy and that the war upon them is just. This must be done in a certain way, or the war is unjust, which means that the Roman gods can cause this war to go very badly for Rome. The Romans are incredibly superstitious. They must do these rituals or face very real consequences from the wrathful Roman gods. Collectively, the priests have the job of interacting with the Roman state and advising the state on the disposition of the gods and whether a certain political or military act is viable in the context of the approval of the gods. Collectively, these priests are called pontiffs. The chief pontiff, the priest who is in charge of all the rest of the priests, is called the Pontifex Maximus. And the Pontifex Maximus is essentially in control of the functioning of the state religion, and so is therefore of incredibly critical importance to the functioning of the Roman state. This is still true today. The chief religious figure in Rome is still the Pontifex Maximus. The third king is known for building up Rome's military power. This is Tullus Hostilius. And for focusing on this to the exclusion of all other things, including ignoring all of the religious priorities and obligations of the king that had been established by Numa. And as a result of this, the reign of Tullus Hostilius demonstrates that ignoring the religious aspect of the state leads to military and social disaster for Rome. So the story is that, the fact that Tullus paid little heed to religious observances during his reign led to pestilence and showers of stones. In terror, he attempted to carry out sacrifices that had been established by Numa to an aspect of Jupiter. However, Tullus did not undertake the ceremony correctly, and both he and his house were struck by lightning and reduced to ashes as a result of the anger of Jupiter. The other key event in Roman legend associated with the reign of Tullus is a conflict with Alba Longa, which is a Latin city not far from Rome. Instead of having a battle, they decide to settle this by single combat. As it turns out, according to this legend, both Rome and Alba Longa have triplets that are incredible warriors. This ends up being a battle to the death between these two sets of triplets on each side to prevent many more people from dying. And so, both sets of triplets gladly agree to risk their lives for the sake of their fellow citizens. The Roman brothers, the Horatii, end up being victorious. There are other stories associated with it as well that will come up later. But the result of this is that Alba Longa becomes a vassal state to Rome. And when the Albans later betray the Romans, Alba Longa is absorbed into Rome. So the fourth king, Ancus Marcius, is seen as reestablishing the dual priorities of having Rome's military strength and its religious structures working together to ensure the success of Rome. And so Ancus Marcius wages wars successfully on enemies amongst the Latins and amongst the hill peoples. He expands Roman territory. In particular, he's associated with the Roman port city of Ostia. Ostia is the Latin city that is at the mouth of the Tiber. And this is a good distance from Rome, but Rome annexes Ostia and makes it its port. And so Rome now has access to the sea. The Roman relationship with the sea is very complicated, but what this means is that Romans have greater scope in terms of their long-distance trade once they have a port on the Tyrrhenian Sea. The fifth king is Tarquinius Priscus, and the name Tarquinius identifies him as an Etruscan immigrant. A lot of Roman histories talk about how Rome is being ruled over by the Etruscans at this point because we have a king with an Etruscan name. I don't think that's the most accurate interpretation of this phase of the Roman story. As I talked about in the other videos, Rome is heavily influenced by the Etruscans. The Etruscans have a great deal of cultural influence on the Romans, including a lot of their structures and the regalia of the king and the aspects of Rome that have been brought into this, including, for example, the triumph, which is associated with the reign of Tarquinius Priscus. This is when you have a significant defeat of an enemy. The general undertakes a parade of the captured prisoners and booty and the soldiers who secured that victory through the city of Rome on a winding path from the gate into the city all the way up to the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. And the general rides in the chariots during this parade, which is also a religious ritual. He wears red facial makeup like the image of Jupiter in the temple, and a special toga that is embroidered with imagery used only by the triumphing general. At the end of this triumph, you get to the temple, you perform a sacrifice in honor of Jupiter, and then you remove your facial makeup, you remove the minim, and you put on your white toga with the purple stripe, and you become an ordinary Roman again. The glory and accolades and self-aggrandizement that comes with a great victory is thereby contained to the duration of the triumph and is done at the end of it. This is a ritual that's imported from the Etruscans, but is invested with special Roman meaning that has to do with the Roman mentality. This is the way that we need to talk about the influence of the Etruscans onto the Romans. All of the influence that the Etruscans have onto the Romans is repurposed toward ensuring the Roman identity, and everything Etruscan that's brought into Rome, from what it is that the kings wear to the triumph to the alphabet, is repurposed as a component of the Roman identity, which rejects the luxury and ostentation and splendor of the Etruscan cities and places value in austerity and family and valor and prudence and self-sacrifice. The sixth king, Servius Tullius, is thought of as a populist, and so the things that are invested in him as a king are associated with the empowerment of the Roman people. He expands the franchise and ensures that more people can vote and participate in government. He replaces the assembly of curies, the Comitia Curiata, which is controlled by the nobility, with the assembly of centuries. The Roman army is organized according to centuries. The foundational element of the Roman army is the century. The guy in charge of a century is called a centurion. What the centurion assembly, the Comitia Centuriata, is the Roman army meeting as an assembly. Instead of the nobles deciding what they want to in the curate assembly, this is everybody that is above the minimum property line meeting as an assembly to choose its leadership and to decide whether to go to war and so forth and so on. All these matters that involve Rome as a people are now decided by the Centurion Assembly. Centurion Assembly, the army meeting as an assembly. And because it is the army meeting as an assembly, it meets outside the Pomerium on the fields of Mars, the training field of the Roman legions. It's actually under Servius Tullius that the Romans have their first census and organize themselves according to these classes that I've been talking about. He increases the number of tribes, which improves the representation of ordinary people in the tribal assembly, the other assembly of Roman citizens. He builds a wall outside the Pomerium to protect the city of Rome, and he also is associated with the creation of the Latin League, in which the Latins work together under the leadership of Rome. So Servius Tullius is associated with the empowerment of the Roman people. You can say it's in contrast to the empowerment of the Roman nobility, or you can think of it sort of as the way we were talking about the responsibility that men have to the community and the bloodied hands that result from it, and the responsibility that women have to the community to ensure the permanence of Rome and the creation of the future. These two things are complementary, and both are necessary. And the Romans would see the empowerment of the people and the leadership of the nobility as two complementary aspects of the forging of the Roman state. Of course, this leads to a great deal of friction, especially once the kings are no longer there to mediate between the few and the many. After Servius is a usurper, the either son or grandson of the fifth king, Tarquinius Priscus. This usurper is the seventh king, Tarquinius Superbus. Superbus meaning the proud, the arrogant, the asshat. It is Tarquin's arrogance and pride that brings about the Roman realization that they can no longer have kings. And I'll talk about that more in the next video. For now, that's that.